My son said he was giving me a little rest. Just 2 weeks to recover, recharge, and come home stronger. He packed my suitcase himself, drove me to the care facility, kissed my cheek, and promised, "I'll be back before you know it, Mom." That was 14 days ago, and today I'm still waiting. It's strange, isn't it? How love can sound like care when it's really just control wearing a polite face. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 71 years old. And this is the story of how I discovered my son wasn't giving me a rest. He was giving himself my house. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe to Her Legacy Tales, where we share true stories of women who learned that sometimes trust needs a paper trail. Now back to the beginning. The lobby clock at Sunset Acres was 5 minutes slow. I knew because I'd been staring at it for almost an hour, waiting for Daniel's car to roll up to the circular driveway. My suitcase sat beside my chair, handle extended, a pale blue tag dangling from the zipper. His handwriting, Mom. Discharge. Friday, 11 a.m. He'd written it 2 weeks ago when he checked me in for what he called a rest period. The morning air smelled faintly of disinfectant and brewed coffee. The television over the fireplace whispered an old cooking show, volume turned low. 2 other residents napped by the window, their blankets tucked under their chins. I'd already signed the discharge forms at 10, handed back my key fob, and hugged the nurse who helped me with my physical therapy. Everything was ready, except Daniel. At 11:30, I told myself maybe traffic was bad. At 11:40, maybe he'd stopped for gas. By noon, the excuses started to taste sour. I asked the receptionist if she could call him. She dialed, waited, and mouthed the word voicemail. I smiled politely and said, "That's all right. He's probably on his way." Inside, I felt the familiar thrum that comes before panic, the one nurses learn to suppress during emergencies. Breathe in, count to 4. Breathe out, count to 6. I pulled my tablet from my purse to pass the time. I hadn't turned it on in days. The Wi-Fi here was slow, and the small screen made my eyes ache. Still, it felt good to hold something familiar. I opened the weather app first, rain expected by evening, then scrolled through my email. Junk offers, newsletters, a note from my neighbor Janet, who watered my roses. The subject line made me pause. "Saw your house online. Are you moving?" I frowned and tapped the link. It opened the county real estate site. There it was, a full-color listing of my white brick house on Maple Drive, the one Harold and I bought in 1979, the one with the lilac bushes by the fence. Under offer, $298,000, move-in ready. Every photo looked staged, the curtains ironed, the coffee table cleared, the quilt on my bed folded into perfect squares. My stomach tightened. I'd spent 40 years in that house. I knew the angle of every window and the slant of every afternoon shadow. But in those pictures, it looked sterile, like a hotel room wearing my memories. For a long minute, I couldn't move. A draft from the vent brushed my ankles. The lobby smelled suddenly too clean, like bleach instead of air. I read the description again, line by line, until my vision blurred. Charming single-story home with updated fixtures. Owner relocated to full care residence. Quick closing available. Owner relocated. That was me. Relocated. I whispered the word under my breath as if saying it softly might change its meaning. My thumb hovered over Daniel's number. Part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe a clerical mistake. Maybe a test listing. But the phrase "quick closing available" told the truth no one had spoken aloud. When the receptionist walked by, I asked as calmly as I could you print me the facility intake sheet from when I arrived? I just want to double-check something." She hesitated. "That's normally in the patient file, Mrs. Hayes. Is something wrong?" "No," I said. I just need to confirm a date. While she went to fetch the file, I looked back down at my tablet. In the corner of the page, a small line caught my eye. A property listing number I didn't recognize. Right beneath it were the words, "Next showing, Saturday, from 11:30 until noon. Tomorrow." Someone was planning to walk through my kitchen, through my life, while I sat here waiting for a ride that wasn't coming. The receptionist returned with a single sheet of paper. My name at the top, Daniel's just below mine under responsible party. The phrase I'd skimmed 2 weeks ago without thought now glowed like a warning label. Responsible party, not emergency contact, not next of kin. "Thank you," I said, sliding it into my purse. She smiled. "I'm sure your son will be here soon. He's such a nice man, always very organized." I nodded, but the back of my throat felt tight. Maybe organized, yes. Or maybe thorough in ways I hadn't imagined. I walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard where the gardeners trimmed the hedges. It was quiet, except for the snip of clippers and the faint hum of the air unit. Beyond the gate, the world went on. Traffic, grocery stores, sunlight glinting off windshields. I hadn't realized how small 2 weeks could make a person feel. I sat down again and opened the listing one more time. I scrolled slowly to the bottom, where the contact details were written. There it was, Daniel's name, followed by his office information from the realty group. He'd even used his professional address. A cold wave passed through me. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. It was business. I whispered, mostly to myself, "He's really selling it." The words hung in the air, soft enough that no one else heard. For the first time since Harold's funeral, I felt the floor tilt under me, not from grief, but from disbelief. I'd trusted Daniel with my medical files, my spare keys, my bank statements. I'd believed that trust was the same as love. A soft voice behind me interrupted the spiral. "Mrs. Hayes, are you all right?" It was Clara, the nurse who usually brought my medication in the evenings. I folded the paper in my lap. "I'm fine, dear. Just a little delay in my plans." She glanced at my suitcase. "Do you want me to check on your ride?" "No," I said, forcing a smile. "He'll come, eventually." But even as I said it, I knew he wouldn't. Not today. Maybe not ever. I closed the tablet and sat still until the clock struck 12:30. Each tick sounded louder, like a countdown to something I hadn't agreed to. Somewhere, strangers were reading a contract that called me Relocated. Somewhere, my living room smelled of open house candles and new paint. If anyone else had been watching, they'd have seen an older woman sitting quietly with her bag beside her chair, hands folded, eyes dry. They wouldn't have guessed that in her mind, she was already planning how to get back home. If this ever happened to you or someone you love, I'd tell whoever listens to stories like mine, right where you're watching from down below, because silence is how things like this spread. The rain started later that afternoon, the kind that streaks the windows in thin diagonal lines and makes the air smell like wet stone. I watched it slide down the glass beside my bed and thought about the house on Maple Drive, how water would be gathering in the gutters there too, the same sound I used to hear from the kitchen while brewing tea. That house had been my compass for 42 years. Harold and I bought it when Daniel was 2. We'd saved for 5 years, eating canned soup for dinner and sewing our own curtains, just to afford that down payment. It wasn't big, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, but it was ours, paid in full the day Harold retired from the post office. The walls still hold echoes of every version of us. Daniel's laughter chasing a paper plane down the hall, Harold's cough drifting from the garage, my own footsteps crossing from stove to table every night at 6. Sometimes I think a home is less about walls and more about the rhythm a family leaves behind. Daniel grew up practical, like his father. As a boy, he built towers from cereal boxes, balancing them with surgical precision. When Harold died, he took charge of the funeral arrangements, the insurance calls, even the headstone. I remember feeling grateful and a little small at the same time. He seemed to know exactly what to do while I stood still, learning how to breathe alone. After the service, we sat at that same kitchen table where we used to share Sunday breakfasts. He said, "Mom, I'll look after everything now." I smiled then, because it sounded loving. Only years later did I realize everything meant more than bills and repairs. It meant decisions too. When he got his real estate license, I was proud. He sent me glossy flyers from every house he sold, names circled, prices scribbled in the margins. "Market's moving fast," he'd say. "You picked a gold mine location." I didn't think much of it, just smiled and told him to be careful driving between showings. I never imagined the next flyer would be mine. The last time he visited before bringing me here, it was a Thursday morning in late April. The dogwood trees were blooming, and my knee still ached from slipping on the front steps a week earlier. Daniel walked through the door with that purposeful stride that always reminded me of Harold in uniform. He placed a grocery bag on the counter, fruit cups, bottled water, instant oatmeal. "You need a break," he said. "Let me find a place for you to rest, just for a couple of weeks." I laughed. "Daniel, I'm fine. It's just a bruise." "Mom," he said, the way adult children do when they want to sound reasonable but end up sounding firm. "You fell, twice this month. What if you'd broken something? I can't concentrate at work worrying you're home alone." That last part softened me. I told him I'd think about it. He handed me a brochure for Sunset Acres Recovery Wing, short-term rehabilitation, friendly staff, day trips, yoga for seniors. The pictures showed smiling women with silver hair pouring tea under magnolia trees. It looked harmless enough. He offered to drive me there, just to see it. The rooms were tidy, the nurses kind. When the admissions clerk passed me a clipboard, I signed wherever she pointed. Daniel stood beside me, tapping his pen on the counter. I remember thinking how proud Harold would have been. Our son, competent and attentive. Now, replaying it, I can still see the small details I missed. The way Daniel kept the forms when I finished. How he spoke to the director in low tones. How the clerk smiled politely but avoided my eyes when she asked for my signature a second time, just to be sure. I told myself he was simply being thorough. That word again. Thorough. The first few days at Sunset, Acres were peaceful. I walked the garden paths with Clara, did morning stretches, wrote in my notebook. I felt safe, almost pampered. Every evening Daniel called. "How's the food? Are they treating you well?" he'd ask. "Better than I deserve," I'd joke. "Good," he'd say. "Rest. Don't worry about the house. I've got it covered." Sometimes I heard a faint edge of impatience when I mentioned going home. "Soon, Mom. Let's just get you fully steady on that leg." That was 10 days ago. 10 days that now feel like a trap disguised as care. The nurses here never made me feel old, but Daniel's tone did. There's a difference between being cared for and being managed. The first comes from love, the second from fear, or convenience. When I close my eyes, I can still picture the hallway at home. The faded rug Harold insisted we keep, the dent in the banister where Daniel bumped his toy truck, the framed photo of us at Niagara Falls. I never locked that door against my own son. Why would I? Trust was the language of our family. I used to keep a folder in the kitchen drawer labeled "Important Papers." Inside were deeds, tax receipts, Harold's pension letters. Daniel knew exactly where it was. I taught him to be organized, to keep records. "Paper doesn't lie," Harold always said. Maybe Daniel learned that lesson too well. The rain outside deepened to a steady rhythm, and I caught my reflection in the dark window. The face looking back was older than I felt, lines tracing where years had pressed hardest, but my eyes were still sharp. Not fragile, not done. I thought about calling Janet, my neighbor, but what would I say? "Hi, could you peek out your window and tell me if my house still belongs to me?" It sounded absurd. Besides, if Daniel really listed it, it wasn't her problem. It was mine to solve. I'd faced worse. I'd held dying hands, comforted families, managed crises measured in seconds. This would take patience instead of speed, documentation instead of adrenaline. Still, the betrayal burned in a quieter way, the kind that doesn't scream, it just settles in the bones. When the intercom announced dinner at 5, I stayed where I was. I wasn't hungry. I wanted to be home stirring soup, hearing the clink of Harold's spoon against his cup. Instead, I was here under fluorescent light, trying to remember which line on a form had turned my son into a stranger. By 6, the rain eased. The hallway smelled of lemon polish. Clara passed by carrying a tray of mail. "Any word from your son?" she asked gently. "Not yet," I said. She studied my face for a moment. "If you need me after my shift, I'll be at the desk." "Thank you, Clara." When she walked away, I opened my notebook and wrote one line across a fresh page. Friday. House listed under offer. Intake form says responsible party. Must confirm exact wording tomorrow. Then below it. Trust. Verification. Always. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the tablet. The screen was still lit, the real estate photos looping like a cruel slideshow. I turned it face down. Tomorrow I'd find out exactly what Daniel had done and how far he'd gone. But tonight, I let myself remember the version of him I still wanted to believe in. The boy who built cereal box towers, who promised after his father's funeral that he'd look after everything. Maybe he still thought he was keeping that promise. The next morning began with sunlight spilling through the blinds, slicing the room into quiet stripes. I'd slept only in fragments, each hour spent listening to the sound of carts in the hallway and doors closing softly in the distance. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I made up my mind. If Daniel had listed the house, I would find proof. Not through anger, but through paper. At 7, I slipped on my cardigan and walked toward the front desk. The air smelled faintly of oatmeal and disinfectant. A young receptionist looked up from her computer. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes," she said brightly. "Breakfast starts soon." "Could you help me with something small?" I asked. "I need a copy of my admission form. I think one of the dates might be wrong." Her smile flickered. "I'm not sure I'm allowed to print that without permission." I kept my voice steady. "It's my signature. I just need to see what I agreed to." Before she could answer, Clara appeared at the end of the hallway, still fastening her name tag. She noticed my expression immediately. "Eleanor? Is something wrong?" "I just need a moment," I said. She guided me into a small medication room behind the nurse's station. The air was cool and quiet, filled with the scent of rubbing alcohol. "I think Daniel used your intake paperwork for something it was never meant for," I told her. "The receptionist said he signed as my responsible party. Do you know what that means legally?" Clara frowned, folding her arms. "That usually just means we contact him for emergencies or billing. It's not permission to make decisions about your property or your life. Why?" I pulled a folded printout from my purse, the online photo of my house. Clara stared at it, then at me. "Is this your home?" "Yes," I said. "Apparently, it's for sale." Her eyes widened. "Oh, Eleanor, I just need to be sure the paperwork here doesn't give him that right." Clara went to her computer, clicked through a few pages, then printed a single sheet. "Here." she said softly. This is your file. Look, his name is listed as emergency contact, nothing more. She circled the line with a blue pen. Keep this copy safe. It proves he has no authority beyond that. I took it with both hands, feeling the weight of something solid. Truth on paper. Thank you, Clara. She hesitated, then said, I've seen families twist details. Like this. They call it help, but it isn't. Be careful. I will, I said. And thank you for being kind enough to say that out loud. Back in my room, I opened my tablet. The house listing was still there, glowing on the screen. Under offer. I read the phrase again and again, as if repetition could dull its sting. I decided to save every bit of it. I took screenshots of the photographs, the description, the agent's name, everything. Then I made a new folder and labeled it, in plain words, proof. Years of nursing had taught me that paper protects better than emotion ever could. When things fall apart, you don't argue, you document. By late morning, I called the main office and asked a simple question. When did my son extend my stay here? The woman on the line rustled papers. Let's see. It looks like an update was made in early May. He signed for 2 more weeks. And did I sign anything? No, ma'am, just your son. I thanked her and hung up. Early May, that was the day after I told Daniel over the phone I was coming home soon. He must have driven here the next morning to make sure that didn't happen. My stomach turned, but my thoughts were clear. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was control, wrapped in concern. I went back to my tablet and searched for my address on the county website. When the page loaded, I saw a small note near the bottom. Transfer pending. Verification required. I clicked the link, and a scanned form appeared. My name printed neatly, my signature shaky, but recognizable. Only it wasn't mine. The curves were wrong, the spacing too tight. At the bottom was a notary section stamped with an expiration date that had already passed. I didn't need to understand the law to know that was serious. I whispered to myself, You slipped up, Daniel. You always rush the fine print. Then I printed the page. I didn't need the exact codes or numbers. The ink alone told the story. When I placed the printouts in a neat pile on my bedside table, I felt something shift inside me. The fear didn't leave, but it found structure. Evidence gives shape to courage. Before bed, I opened my journal and wrote one line in careful script. He used love as permission. I will use proof as protection. Then, just below it, tomorrow, call the county office. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Outside my window, the courtyard lights flickered on. Somewhere, my son might have believed I was too old or too tired to fight. He didn't know the kind of strength it takes to care for strangers through long nights, to hold the dying and the living at once. He didn't know that quiet people can still roar, just not in ways anyone expects. The next day began like every other morning at Sunset Acres. Routine, efficient, and gentle in a way that almost disguised control. Breakfast trays clattered faintly down the hall. The smell of oatmeal mixed with disinfectant drifted under my door. From the courtyard came the hum of sprinklers turning on and off, a rhythm that matched the way my thoughts circled in slow, careful loops. I had the intake form Clara printed for me folded inside my notebook, tucked beneath the cover like a secret map. Each time I touched the paper, I felt steadier. It was proof that I hadn't imagined any of this. Still, I needed help, not emotional comfort, but another pair of eyes, someone who could confirm what I suspected in plain words. Clara was the only one here who had looked at me like a person instead of a patient. She found me mid-morning in the sunroom, sitting near the window with a cup of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Barely," I said. "Do you have a minute?" She nodded and sat across from me. Outside, two residents played cards under the awning. Their laughter carried faintly through the glass. I slid the folded listing printout toward her. "That's my home," I said quietly. "My son is selling it." Clara's eyes widened. She studied the photo, the neat lawn, the for sale banner, the bright caption promising a quick closing. Then she looked back at me. "You're sure this isn't some sort of mistake?" "I wish it were," I said. "He used my admission papers to make it look like he had power of attorney." She frowned. "That form doesn't give anyone that authority. It only means he's our emergency contact. Nothing more." "I know that now," I said. "But the outside world doesn't. If a document looks official, people don't ask many questions." Clara exhaled slowly. "You need to get a copy of everything he's filed, whatever he's using to justify the sale." "That's my plan," I said. "I'm going to the county office, today if possible." She studied me for a moment, as if weighing how much risk I could handle. Then she said, "If anyone asks why you're leaving, tell them you have a dental appointment. No one questions those." A small laugh escaped me. "You sound experienced." "I've worked here 10 years," she said, smiling faintly. "You see all kinds of family drama in a place like this. But yours feels deliberate." "It is deliberate," I said. "He thinks I'm too tired to notice, or too grateful for his help to ask questions." Clara leaned forward. "Do you want me to call a taxi for you when you're ready?" I nodded. "That would help." "Give me an hour," she said. "I'll clock out for lunch around 11 and make the call then." I placed my hand over hers. "Thank you, Clara. You don't know what this means." Her eyes softened. "I think I do." When she left, I went back to my room and began to gather the things I would need. My purse, my notebook, the printed documents, and a sweater. The small act of packing made me feel alive again, like a person returning from sleep. For days I had waited, hoping Daniel would appear, explain, make sense of everything. Now I stopped waiting. Before leaving, I called the front desk. "I'll be stepping out for a few hours," I said. "Just a dental appointment." "No problem, Mrs. Hayes," the receptionist replied cheerfully. "Will your son be picking you up?" "No," I said. "I'll manage on my own." She didn't ask more. People rarely do when the answer sounds certain. Clara met me near the side exit a little before 11. She had changed out of her uniform into jeans and a windbreaker. A small taxi waited at the curb, engine running. "I told the driver you'd need to stop at the county building," she said quietly. "It's only about 15 minutes away." I nodded. "You really didn't have to go this far." "Yes, I did," she said. "Everyone deserves at least one person who believes them." I smiled, but my throat tightened. When I was younger, I used to be that person for patience. It feels strange to be on the other side. "Then take it as karma returning the favor," she said. We hugged briefly, an awkward, careful embrace, and then I climbed into the back seat. As the taxi pulled away, I saw her reflection in the side mirror, one hand raised, watching until the car turned the corner. The driver was an older man with silver hair and a calm voice. He didn't ask questions, just hummed quietly to the radio. Out the window, the town slid by in soft motion. Gas stations, a bakery I once visited with Harold, the clock tower marking noon. Each familiar landmark steadied me. By the time we reached the county building, I had already rehearsed what I would say. I wasn't going to make a scene. I would ask simple questions, get the answers, and take notes. That's how nurses survive chaos. You stay factual. Inside, the building smelled of paper and dust, the kind of scent that only old files carry. I joined a short line at the property records counter. When it was my turn, a clerk in glasses greeted me with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" I need to check on a document connected to my home, I said. It might have been filed recently under my name. He typed for a moment, then looked up. Yes, there's something pending. Would you like to view it? Yes, please. He turned the screen toward me, and I saw it. My name, typed neatly above a digital signature that looked almost, but not quite, like mine. The difference was small but unmistakable, like a note sung slightly off-key. Can you print this for me? I asked. He nodded and pressed a button. The printer whirred softly, spitting out the sheet. When he handed it to me, I noticed a faint smudge where the notary seal should have been. Is that normal? I asked. He leaned closer, frowning. Actually, no. This commission stamp expired months ago. It shouldn't have been used. Then it isn't valid? Not legally, no, he said. I can flag it. For review if you'd like. Please do. He wrote something in red ink at the top and stamped it with a mark that read, Verification Hold. Thank you, I said, my voice steady but my hands trembling slightly. He smiled. You'd be surprised how often family members get creative with paperwork. Good thing you checked. I folded the paper and slipped it into my notebook. You have no idea, I said softly. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stood on the steps of the county building and let the sun warm my face. The sound of traffic, the scent of rain on pavement, the hum of life around me. It all felt sharper, more vivid. Freedom can be quiet, but you feel it when it arrives. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for Daniel. I was waiting for myself. By the time I reached home, the sun was already low. Its light stretched thin and gold across the parking lot. I sat in the taxi for a few seconds after paying the driver, watching the windshield wipers move back and forth even though the rain had stopped. I wasn't ready to walk inside yet, not because I was afraid of the silence, but because I knew what it meant. Once I crossed that threshold, everything would become real. The blue tag from my suitcase dangled near my fingers. It had survived every move, every trip, every visit to Harold's parents decades ago. Now, it looked like proof that I still owned something in this world, even if it was only a piece of worn plastic with my name written in fading ink. Inside, the air was musty, a mix of lavender cleaner and stale dust. Someone had aired out the rooms recently. The curtains were drawn open, and a vase of fake flowers sat on the coffee table. The little staging touches made me feel like a stranger in my own life. I stood in the middle of the living room and listened. The house didn't answer. My phone buzzed on the table, a number I knew by heart. Daniel. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Mom, he said, his voice casual, a little too bright. You made it back all right? I didn't expect to see my house online, I said. My voice came out steady, but I could hear the tightness under it. There was a pause. Then, you saw that? Yes, I said. I saw everything, including the part where the owner was described as relocated to full care. He sighed. Mom, please don't make this a big deal. It's temporary. I'm just managing things until we figure out what's best for you. What's best for me? I repeated slowly. Or what's easiest for you? You're tired, Mom. You fell twice this year. That house needs repairs, taxes keep rising, and you know how many scams target older homeowners. Daniel, I said, interrupting gently. I've managed fine for 40 years. If you wanted to help, you could have just asked. There was silence on the other end. Then, in a softer tone, he said, I didn't mean to scare you. I thought if the listing went up, maybe you'd see it and realize it's time to simplify. I was going to explain everything when you came home. You mean if I came home? I said. Because you extended my stay without asking. He hesitated. They said you needed more recovery time. They said you signed for me. That's standard procedure. No, it isn't, I said. I checked. The intake form names you as my emergency contact, not my legal representative. And the notary who supposedly approved the sale, her commission expired months ago. This time, his silence wasn't hesitation. It was guilt breathing through the phone. Mom, he finally said, his voice low. I was just trying to make things easier. You shouldn't have to worry about property or money anymore. You deserve peace. Peace doesn't come from erasing a person's life while she's still living it. Don't say it like that, he said sharply. You know I've done everything for you. Then stop doing this, I said. Withdraw the listing. He started to protest, but I cut him off. Daniel, the county office already flagged your document. The notary stamp isn't valid. It's on hold for review. I heard him exhale hard through his nose. You went there? Yes, I said. And I'll go again if I need to. Mom, you can't. I can, I said quietly. I may be old, Daniel, but I'm not powerless. The line went silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke again, his voice had softened. I'll fix it, he said. I'll call the agency and stop the sale. Good, I said. That's the least you can do. He murmured something I couldn't make out. Maybe apology, maybe frustration. Then hung up. For a moment, I stood in the quiet house, phone still in hand, the dial tone buzzing faintly before I set it down. My heart was steady. Not angry, not even broken, just clear. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where Harold's old tools used to be. The folder labeled Important Papers was still there. Inside, the deed, the insurance, the bills. Everything in my name. Each page felt like a pulse. Proof of existence. Proof of endurance. The rain started again outside, tapping softly against the windows. I looked around the room, the faded rug, the dented banister, the photo of Harold smiling in his post office uniform, and realized how much of life exists in the quiet things you fight to keep. I touched the blue tag on my suitcase again and whispered, I'm still here. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, painting thin bars across the wall. I made coffee the old way, the kettle, the slow pour, the smell that filled the room with something familiar and forgiving. It had been less than a day since Daniel's call, but I already sensed a new kind of distance between us. He hadn't texted, hadn't checked in. I wasn't sure whether that silence meant guilt or anger, but either way, it gave me space to breathe. I sat at the kitchen table and spread out my papers, the flagged document from the county, the printed intake sheet, and my notebook filled with notes in Harold's tidy handwriting. Each line of ink felt like a bridge across time. He'd always said, "Control isn't love, Ellie. Real love lets people stand where they are." I used to think that was about marriage. Now I knew it applied to everything, even to parenthood. I opened my journal and wrote a new line beneath yesterday's entry. There's a line between caring and control. The first gives comfort. The second takes it away. Around mid-morning, Clara called. I wanted to check on you, she said. Did you get what you needed? I did, I told her, and more than I expected. She hesitated, then asked, Did you talk to your son? Yes, I said. He promised to withdraw the listing. Do you believe him? I want to, I said, but I've learned wanting and believing aren't the same thing. She was quiet for a moment. Do you need anything from me? A witness? A note? I smiled faintly. You've already done enough, Clara. Just keep that copy safe, the one you printed. It might come in handy. I will, she said. And Eleanor, you did the right thing. After the call, I sat for a long time, staring at the sunlight on the floor. There's a certain stillness that comes after confrontation. Not peace exactly, but relief that the truth no longer has to hide. Still, I knew Daniel's promise wasn't the end. When people are cornered by their own actions, they look for new doors. I went to the mailbox that afternoon, mostly out of habit. Inside was a single envelope from my bank. The return address made my stomach tighten. I opened it carefully, and inside was a statement showing a withdrawal request, large enough to make me dizzy, submitted 3 days earlier. The authorization line read, "Joint account, Daniel Hayes." But there was only one problem. I'd never had a joint account with him. I sat down on the porch step, letting the paper tremble in my hands. The blue tag on my suitcase brushed against my wrist again, and for a moment, it felt like Harold's voice beside me. Calm, logical, certain. "Paper doesn't lie," he used to say. I folded the statement neatly and placed it with the others in my folder. No anger this time. Just a quiet understanding that I was no longer trying to reclaim my home. I was protecting what little autonomy remained. That evening, I called the bank manager directly, a woman named Patricia who'd known me for 20 years. Her voice softened when she recognized mine. "Eleanor, it's been ages. How are you?" "I've been better," I said. "I think my son may have tried to access my savings. Let's take a look," she said, tapping on her keyboard. "Ah, I see the request here. You're right. It was filed, but it's on hold pending verification. We flagged it because the signature didn't match yours." Relief washed through me, so sharp it almost hurt. "Can you freeze the account until I come in tomorrow?" "Already done," she said. "We'll need your identification to finalize it, but don't worry, we've got your back." "Thank you, Patricia," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "Truly." She hesitated before hanging up. "Eleanor," she said, "whatever's happening, you're not alone. We see more of this than you'd believe." I thanked her again and ended the call. Then I sat in the quiet house, surrounded by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. It struck me then how betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's written in fine print. Sometimes it's disguised as care. And sometimes it's signed in ink by someone who once promised to protect you. Outside, the rain had stopped. I opened the front door and stood on the porch, breathing in the damp evening air. Somewhere, a train passed in the distance. Slow, steady, familiar. I thought about how life moves like that too. You can't stop it, but you can decide what you carry on board. I glanced down at the blue tag again. That small rectangle of fading plastic with my name still legible despite the years. It wasn't just luggage anymore. It was identity. It was proof. And as I stood there, I realized something simple and true. I wasn't the one who needed saving. I was the one who had finally stopped waiting to be saved. Saturday came with a pale sky and the kind of breeze that flips a page before you finish reading it. I woke early, made coffee the old way, and sat at the kitchen table with my papers spread out like a map. The county printout, Clara's copy of the intake form, my notes in Harold's careful hand. A corner of the blue suitcase tag peeked out from under the folder, the edges worn smooth from years of travel. It looked small and stubborn at the same time, like the sum of every journey I had taken and every one I refused to take. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was awake. Lawnmowers droned. A child laughed down the block. A delivery truck rumbled past the window. That was when I saw the car stop in front of my house. Then another. Strangers stepped onto the curb, shielding their eyes as they read a printed flyer. One of them checked a watch and pointed toward my porch. I stood very still. Yesterday, Daniel had promised to pull the listing. Promises, I reminded myself. Do not cancel appointments someone has already made. A woman in a tidy blazer walked briskly up the walkway. Behind her, a couple followed, heads together, voices low. The woman tried the front door and hesitated when she found it unlocked. She called out, not expecting an answer. I stepped from the kitchen into the hall. "Good morning," I said. "Can I help you?" The woman startled, then recovered into her professional smile. "We have a scheduled showing. The owner's agent said the property would be available between 11:30 and noon." I nodded. "Then let's make the most of our time." They looked past me into the living room, at the staged flowers and the smoothed couch cushions, then back at my face, unsure. The woman cleared her throat. "Are you the current occupant?" "I am the owner," I said, "and I'd like to begin by hearing the line in your paperwork that grants permission for today's visit." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Please read the authority clause," I said gently. "Out loud if you don't mind." The couple exchanged a glance. The woman flipped to the last page, following a trail of sticky notes. Her voice was steady at first, then slowed as she read. "Authority provided by power of attorney. Seller's representative, acting on behalf of the homeowner." I held my hand up. "That is the part I need you to hear. There is no power of attorney. I am capable, I am present, and no one has authority to sell this home but me." Silence flattened the room. Outside, a sparrow landed on the porch railing and tilted its head as if the bird too were waiting for the next sentence. The woman's smile faltered. "Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. I was told—" "I know what you were told," I said, still calm. "But the county has already flagged the file. The notary stamp used on the transfer attempt expired months ago. The intake form from the care facility lists my son as an emergency contact only, not a decision maker. And I am telling you, here and now, this showing is not authorized." The woman swallowed. I understand." She turned to the couple. "I'm so sorry for the confusion." The buyers looked at me with an expression I know well from nursing, an apologetic mixture of kindness and relief. They wanted to back away without causing harm. The man spoke first. "We didn't mean to intrude." "You haven't," I said. "You've helped, actually." The woman tucked her papers into her folder with careful hands. "I will contact the office immediately and suspend the listing." "Thank you," I said. "If it helps, tell them the homeowner is at her kitchen table with a stack of proof and more patience than they think." We stood together for a moment in the quiet. The couple glanced around the room one last time, not as shoppers, but as people recognizing a life still being lived, and then they stepped out into the sunlight. The agent paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "I hope you keep it." "So do I said. When the door closed, I stood there listening to the faint click of the latch. The house exhaled. I could almost hear Harold's voice, warm and dry. "Paper doesn't lie, Ellie. And people listen when you speak like paper." I walked back to the table, lifted the blue tag, and pressed it flat beneath my palm. The plastic felt cool, familiar, mine. I tucked it into the front pocket of my cardigan like a small flag. Not 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel. I let it buzz once, then answered. He didn't say hello. "Why did you interfere with the showing?" "Because it was my house being shown," I said. He blew out a breath. "I told you I'd handle it." "You told me you would cancel it," I said. "You did not." He started to defend himself, words tumbling quick and slippery. Something about schedules, something about contracts, something about how I always took things personally. When he stopped for air, I spoke very quietly. "Come to the house, Daniel. Today. Bring whatever papers you think give you the right to sell what you did not build. We'll sit at the table, and you can show me where my name became yours." There was a long pause. "I'll be there," he said. "Good," I replied. "And bring the keys I gave you. We'll talk about those too." I set the phone down and looked around the room. Noon light pooled on the floorboards, soft as milk. I straightened the stack of documents until the edges aligned, then folded my hands on the table like a woman ready for church. I wasn't afraid. I was ready to be believed. He arrived in the early afternoon without knocking, the way children do when they still believe every room belongs to them. I let him come in. I let him stand in the hall with his jaw set and his shoulders squared, the same posture he wore the day he learned to tie a tie for his father's funeral. Time can turn a boy into a man, but it cannot turn control into love. "Sit," I said, motioning to the chair across from me. He did, reluctantly. He placed a folder on the table, thick with printed forms, then kept one hand on top of it, as if he could hold the papers still by force. I set my own folder down beside the blue tag. The plastic caught the light and threw a small square of sky onto the table. "We are going to walk through this calmly," I said. "No raised voices, no dramatics, only facts." "I have always been dealing in facts," he said, trying to sound patient. "You need a safer place to live. You fell twice. The market is strong. This house is a burden." I nodded once. "Those are opinions dressed as facts. Let's undress them." He blinked. "Mom." "Start with your authority," I said. "Show me the paper that says you can act as me." He pulled out a page and slid it across the table. "Care Facility Authorization." I did not touch it yet. "Read the title aloud." He glanced down. "Emergency contact information." "And the line that describes your role?" I asked. He skimmed. "Responsible party." "That means billing and phone calls," I said. "It does not mean ownership. It does not mean power of attorney. It does not mean you." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "Now," I said softly, "show me the notary page from the property transfer." His fingers hesitated. He withdrew another sheet and set it down, not quite meeting my eyes. I slid the county printout beside it. The clerk noticed the commission date. It expired before the day this was stamped. "Do you know what an expired commission means, Daniel?" He swallowed. "It means there may be an issue." "It means invalid," I said. "It means a stranger on the internet has more authority over my house than this stamp." He stared at the paper as if it might rearrange itself into absolution. When he did look up, his eyes were tired. "I didn't think you'd notice." There it was. The truest sentence he had spoken in weeks. I took a slow breath. "That is the problem. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought love would make me quiet." He flinched. "I was trying to help." "Help is what you do with someone," I said. "Control is what you do to them." We sat in that silence for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked twice and then fell quiet. He reached into his pocket and set my house keys on the table. They made a small, honest sound. "I shouldn't have done it this way," he said. "I know that now." I nodded once. "Thank you for saying so." He pushed the folder of listing papers toward me. "I'll withdraw everything today." "You will," I said. "And you will send the confirmation to the county office, to the agent, and to me. Then we will talk about what happens next." He stared at the blue tag and looked as if he recognized it. "You always used that on your suitcase," he said, voice softened by memory. "I did," I said. "It made sure my name went where I went. That's all I'm asking for now." He lowered his head. When he spoke again, his voice was small. I was terrified of losing you. After Dad, the house felt unsafe to me. Big, empty, like it could swallow you whole and no one would notice. You could have said that, I replied. You could have sat at this very table and told me you were scared. He rubbed a hand across his face. I didn't want to sound weak. Fear isn't weakness, I said. Hiding fear is, and turning fear into control. I paused. That breaks things you never meant to break. His shoulders slumped. What do you want me to do? First, I said, you will end the sale. Second, you will contact the bank and remove yourself from any account you added your name to. Third, you will schedule a meeting with a counselor, someone who can help you name the difference between care and control. And last, you will accept that this house will be placed into a trust with instructions I alone decide. He looked up. A trust? Yes, I said. Not to keep it from you, to keep it from harm, even if the harm looks like love. He nodded slowly. I can do that? You will do it, I said, but my voice stayed gentle. He sat very still, then reached across the table and touched his fingers to the blue tag. I remember this on your suitcase when I was little, he said. We went to visit Grandma, and you tied it tight so you wouldn't lose it. I told you I could carry the bag. You told me, not yet. I smiled, a real one this time. Not yet is still an answer. He stood to leave, gathering the papers with careful hands. At the door, he paused. I'm sorry, Mom. I know, I said. Now show me. The door closed with that same small click. The house listened with me as the footsteps faded down the path. I picked up the keys, felt their weight settle into my palm, and set them beside the blue tag on the table. Side by side, they looked like a sentence in a language only a home can read. I brewed a fresh pot of tea and sat quietly while the kettle warmed. Outside, the late afternoon light slid along the fence and pooled under the maple, the way it always has. Some stories end with noise. Mine prefers proof. And proof, I've learned, pours best in quiet rooms. The days that followed moved in quiet rhythm, like the soft ticking of the clock above the kitchen door. Daniel kept his word. 2 mornings after our talk, I received an envelope from the real estate office confirming the withdrawal of the listing. Inside was a single page stamped closed without sale. No signatures, no fine print, just the simple truth that my home remained mine. That afternoon, Patricia from the bank called to tell me the attempted withdrawal request had been canceled. The joint access Daniel had tried to open was now blocked, and new security steps were in place. She sounded relieved, as if she'd been holding her breath too. When she asked if I wanted to press charges, I said no. What I wanted was distance, not punishment. Daniel came once more that week. He stood on the porch with a brown envelope and the awkward posture of a man who no longer knew where to put his hands. I opened the door but didn't step aside. I brought the paperwork, he said. All of it's undone. The sale, the account, everything. I nodded. Thank you. He hesitated. You're not going to forgive me, are you? Forgiveness isn't a switch, I said. It's a door. Right now, it's closed, but it isn't locked. He looked past me into the living room, at the photo of his father on the mantel. Dad would be disappointed in me, he whispered. Maybe, I said, but he'd be proud that you stopped before it was too late. For a moment, we stood in that threshold between hurt and hope. He started to say something else, then shook his head. I'll call you in a few days, he murmured. You can, I said, but let it be about dinner or the weather. Nothing that needs signatures. He managed a small smile. Deal. When he left, I closed the door softly behind him. The sound was final, but not cruel. That evening, I brewed tea and carried the cup to the porch. The sun was settling behind the trees, painting the yard in long strips of amber light. The world looked freshly washed after the rain, every leaf still holding a drop. I could hear a neighbor's radio playing faintly, an old song Harold used to hum when he balanced the checkbook. On the table beside me lay the blue suitcase tag, its corners chipped, the ink faded to ghost gray. I turned it over in my hand and smiled. It had followed me through airports, hospitals, moves, and years of ordinary living. It had survived Harold. It had survived Daniel's mistakes. And in a strange way, it had survived me too. The version of me that trusted without checking, that signed without reading, that loved without protecting. I thought of Clara then, her steady eyes, her quiet loyalty. She hadn't just printed a page, she'd handed me back my voice. I made a note to send her a thank you card and maybe a plant for her windowsill. There are people in this world whose goodness is so constant it becomes invisible. I didn't want hers to go unnoticed. Inside, the house felt larger, lighter. No for sale smell of new paint, no empty staging, just my own small clutter, a stack of mail, the teapot, Harold's glasses still resting where he'd last left them. I'd once thought this place could only shrink with time, but that night it grew back around me like it was breathing. I opened the folder one last time. The proof I'd collected, statements, copies, notes, was no longer armor. It was history. A record of what love can look like when it forgets its boundaries. I sealed the folder and slid it into the drawer beside the deed and the keyring. Then I placed the blue tag on top and shut the drawer. That sound, wood against wood, felt like closure. Later, as darkness settled, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights blink on. A group of children rode their bicycles down the block, their laughter echoing through the humid air. I wondered if one of them would grow up to make the same mistake my son did, to confuse protection with possession, love with power. Maybe that's what every generation learns in its own way. The kettle clicked off, and steam drifted into the room. I poured another cup and thought of Harold again. His calm patience, his fondness for proof, his endless belief that people eventually do the right thing once they're shown how. I hoped he was right. I hoped Daniel would learn that lesson, even if it took time. I picked up my journal and wrote the final entry on a blank page. Some losses don't need graves. They need understanding. Today, I kept my home, but what I really saved was the part of me that still believes in people. Love can bruise, but love can also rebuild. I set down the pen and let the ink dry. Hours later, before bed, I stood in the hallway and looked at the clock. Still 5 minutes slow, just as it had been when this began. I decided not to fix it. Maybe not everything broken needs repair. Some things just remind you where you started. I turned off the lights and walked toward my bedroom. At the doorway, I paused to glance back at the living room, bathed in soft moonlight. The shadows moved gently, the way they do in a house that knows who it belongs to. When I lay down, I felt the kind of tired that doesn't come from age, but from completion. Outside, crickets sang. Rainwater ticked softly from the gutters. Somewhere, far away, Daniel was probably staring at his ceiling, replaying every word. I hoped he was learning, not just regretting. That would be enough. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Harold, we're all right now." Then I smiled, because it was true. If you've ever faced something like this, a moment when trust and control blurred together, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Stories like ours remind others they're not alone. And if you believe in quiet strength, in proof over panic, and in the kind of love that learns, subscribe to her legacy tales so you never miss the next one. Because every voice, even the quiet ones, deserves to be heard.